All righty. Welcome, everybody. We're going to let people filter in here and get started just at the top of the hour. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a second. All righty, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining us for this webinar. My name is Sammy Focarino. I'm the Senior Events Manager here at Consensus, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. This webinar is presented by Consensus. Consensus is an intelligent demo automation platform that enhances customer experience, engages high potential buyers, and shortens sales cycles with interactive video demos and tours. You can learn more at goconsensus.com. We had such a great time at all of our events in 2023, and we're very excited to be gearing up for our first event of 2024 in San Francisco. This will be our third time hosting DemoFest X in the Bay Area, and we are planning on this being our biggest and best yet. You can register at demofest.com, or I will also post the link to register in the chat. Okay. We encourage you to participate in today's webinar. Our speakers will answer any questions at the close of the session, but you're welcome to post your questions at any time through the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. If you're having any technical difficulties at any time, go ahead and press the help button on the right side. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. Shruti is the founder CEO of Wingman, now Clary Copilot. She is passionate about helping revenue teams hit their goals through better conversations with their customers. She enjoys working in the interface between technology solutions and business needs across tech, biotech, and material science. She often dreams about marrying her passion for board games with her skills as a leadership coach. Samir is the CEO and co-founder of SalesMotion.io, a go-to-market intelligence platform for ambitious revenue professionals. He successfully scaled Clary EMEA from a startup to a multi-million-dollar venture, leading its growth strategy, operations, and sales engineering function. Samir has deep expertise in sales and CRM technologies and advises various startups. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the rest of the time over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. It's really great to be here. I know you've heard a little bit about what we do, where we are coming at this from. What we are really hoping to do during the session today is give you all a flavor of how our two worlds overlap between Samir and me. Samir having a ton of pre-sales experience, but also all things sales, and now doing his own venture. And me having started from the entrepreneurship side in the sales tech space and, observing pre-sales pretty closely and enjoying the work that I see my pre-sales team do, super proud of everything that they do. And I think it's a really tough job, often doesn't get as much love and visibility as we would like, but I would blame it on all the A's out there. But let's get started. Samir, do you want to say something before we kickstart?
Yes. Thank you, Sammy, for the nice intro. Good morning, everybody, and everybody watching the recording. Great to have you all here. My name is Samir, and very excited to walk through how pre-sales and entrepreneurship go together, what they have in common. Like the intro mentioned, I was in pre-sales for a long time as an IC, then led and built a team, and now running my own company. So very excited for discussion with Shruti. And please also share any questions you have in the chat, and we can make this very interactive.
Absolutely. First things, right, we decided let's look at some of the skills that are maybe common between pre-sales and entrepreneurship and share our own stories. Of course, as we share our stories, we'd also love to hear, your opinions, your takes, agree, disagree, and maybe your own stories as well on chat. So please keep those coming in. Voice of customer. Samir, as a pre-sales person, what comes to your mind when you see those three dreaded or exciting words?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, absolutely critical. It's what when I think about sales of a pre-sales professional, regardless of industry, regardless of what you're exactly selling, what your solutions are, the voice of the customer is one of those most critical things. It's something from start to finish that matters in your process as you work. What are the customers saying? What's important to them? How are they experiencing challenges and issues and pains right now? How are they getting value from your solution? All these things matter so much, and being able to listen, being able to ask the right questions, discovery is absolutely critical as a sales engineer, solutions engineer, however you call the function in your respective companies. And I've seen that as one of the most critical skills in pre-sales. And I think also in entrepreneurship overall, it matters absolutely critically.
So, in fact, my journey with entrepreneurship started with trying to, box this voice of customer. So, fun story, Wingman is in the conversation intelligence space. Now it's called Clary Copilot as part of Clary. When we started Wingman / Clary Copilot, our biggest, my biggest motivation was to say that there is so much that customers come and tell salespeople during every conversation, but because salespeople, are not getting comped for listening to, all the feedback that the customer is giving on the product, and there is often a big disconnect between the customer, the salesperson, and the product teams. And so really, I started on this journey with saying, how do I bring the voice of customer back to every part of the organization where it matters? And, traditionally, the way this used to be done, and, this is how it was being done at the companies where I was working, was that you would actually, if a customer had something valuable to tell the product team or to the marketing team, you would then arrange a call between the customer and the product team. And then, so much would get lost in the middle. And you could maybe arrange like 1 out of every 10 calls for customers who actually had feedback. So my motivation was to actually be able to bring this feedback, scale it up, and make it useful. But what I also realized in that journey is that there is a skill to being able to understand the meaning behind the words when you're thinking about voice of customer. So, when a customer is telling you something as a problem, one is it might either be a problem because of the constraints of the organization that they are operating in, and not necessarily have anything to do with the product or the technology solution that you are trying to provide. So it's important to maybe differentiate those two. But secondly, sometimes when the customer tells you something, they are also telling you something because they want to look good in their own eyes. And an example of that is like, every sales manager that I spoke to when I was building out Wingman would tell me that, yes, coaching is really important. They do it very often. But then what you realize is that either it doesn't happen as often as they hope that they are doing it, or their definition of coaching isn't what real sales coaching is. So that's just an example to say that voice of customer, there's a special skill to actually being able to parse it to make it useful. But yeah, it is definitely the most important thing when you're trying to solve a problem and when you're trying to build a customer-centric company.
Yeah, absolutely. Great explanation. I think, yeah, definitely good shared skill between pre-sales and entrepreneurs. I think that voice of the customer, parsing it, like you said as well, that discovery, it's not always what they say exactly. That's the challenge or problem, but it's kind of between the lines. People have heard of asking why 5 times to really go deep on a challenge or an issue. That's where you start uncovering these things. I think that's something every SE does in their daily lives. And it sounds like in entrepreneurship, you're doing this as well.
Yeah, I think often why is very, very underrated, and it would serve us all much better if we actually have the discipline and not feel shy about asking why 5 times, because sometimes we are just scared that you might be coming across as super annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know this one, sounds pretty obvious. It's not about all the 100 doors that you can show them. It's about the one that will actually unlock the value that they need, right? But there is, I think, the other aspect of solutions versus features, right, which is also you're often handcrafting the solution for them. And that's why I've put the picture on the right side. Before I get into it from an entrepreneurship perspective, Samir, what are some examples maybe of handcrafting solutions based on customer needs?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, every SE listening to this or SE leader listening to this will understand, like, you can't just sell on features, don't show 100 features, standard out of the box stuff. That will just not resonate. It will not resonate in this market. It probably has never properly resonated even in the past. And you really don't want to focus yourself too much on features. You want to focus on solutions and how what you're doing or in an overarching way serves your customers. And that's easier said than done oftentimes, right? So it's kind of that obvious thing, yeah, don't do feature selling, do solution selling. But it's oftentimes easier said than done. What I mean by that is, we get trained on product as sales engineers all the time, as company builders, with maybe a slightly more technical edge now and in sales engineering and kind of doing the CEO job in the company is the same thing. Like you think, oh, how can this be solved, rather than what's the thing that the customer really is after here, and how do I illustrate that, and how do we build something meaningful to address that challenge, or work towards that goal that they have. And I think it just requires constant challenging yourself as well. Like, am I trying just to build a feature because it's easy to just build something based on exactly what they told me? Or do I have to really apply some additional thinking and understanding to this, and then craft a solution that will solve that problem in a way that they maybe didn't even expect? And that's how I kind of think about it. So it's kind of easier said than done. Everybody will agree with this. I would say, yes, that's obvious, solutions versus features. But then how you actually put it to practice is not that easy. And I think it just requires constant stepping back and thinking about it a bit more deeply, rather than just jumping to answering something.
Yeah. And I think in many ways, SCs actually do this better than founders. I think very often founders are so passionate about the product that they are building that they want to showcase everything, all of the goodness all at once. And I think the other reason why, in some sense, founders find this much harder to do is early on in the journey, you're literally trying to see what sticks. And for you to figure out what sticks, you actually have to kind of showcase the whole bundle. But I think there is maybe a better way to do it, which is very similar to what SCs are already very good at doing, which asking the good questions, doing the right type of discovery, and really getting into the problem, understanding the severity and the impact of the problem, so that you're then talking about the right type of features. And I think that is some skill that I would say founders can actually learn from SCs much better. I think the other place where you have the solutions versus features battle maybe becoming somewhat easier is by actually using AI. And today what you can do is, if you're recording all of your customer conversations, you can use the AI to begin to tell you, hey, what are the top features that show up in deals that you win? What are some of the top features that showed up with like a particular segment of customers that you sell to? And those can actually also help you in going from just providing a broad bucket of things that are possible with the product, instead saying that, okay, if I don't exactly know what the customer wants, or if the customer seems unclear, then maybe what are the top 2 things or the top 3 things that I should lead with. And AI and tech can actually help us look at those patterns and come up with much better estimates or guesses when you're flying blind. Okay. Samir, since you came up with this one and I strongly agreed with it, what are some of the examples and of the kind of shit that needs to get done as an SC, and who do you need to work with to get that done?
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite things, probably. But sorry for the profanity so early in the morning for those listening live. The thing is, yeah, I think SCs and entrepreneurs, I'm thinking about this, having been an SC for many years and now running my own company, just starting out. you're fighting on so many fronts all the time, and it's about getting stuff done. Being an SE, when I was at Clary building the company in Europe, it just was required to hold all threads together. You're talking to product in the US about needs in Europe. You're talking to customer success about your existing customers and how you can help. You're talking to the customers and figuring out what is working for them, what isn't. And you're really between so many stakeholders as an SE. And you're kind of uniquely positioned as well because you know the product deeply, you understand the capabilities, but you also know the company quite well, and you know the market quite well. So you're perfectly positioned. You're not a sales rep with maybe not as much tenure yet. You're not a purely technical person, and you're also not just purely talking to customers and not understanding the product. And I think it's very similar for CEOs and founders and startup people as well in general, that they are kind of fighting these multiple fronts. And it's just about getting stuff done. When you've got an issue with product, you've got to get that feedback to them, understand where in a roadmap something fits. If your customer has an issue, connecting with support, making sure stuff gets done. And the same thing with I think when you're starting your company, when you start winning your first customers, it's about just making sure that they get value, making sure that they get product, making sure that they're using the product. And that's really, I think, where you just got to get stuff done. You have that sort of bias to action, which would have been, a way to describe this as well. But I think like to get shit done a bit more. And then that's really where it kind of comes down to. And I think it's a very unique role. You don't have that in many places and in many parts of an organization where you're between so many stakeholders, and you're so well positioned to play as a conduit between those two to get stuff done.
Yeah, when I had to fill forms as a founder, CEO, I would often put my title as the chief janitor, because it's so often when it's nobody's job, it's your job, right? And I think SCs land up playing this role as well, because you're kind of, at the end of the day, somebody needs to hold the ball from the customer perspective, right? And who's internally representing the customer within the organization. Where you're, as a founder, you of course are the person who's speaking constantly to the customer. You're trying to, build the vision, build the future state for the customer. But very often in a larger organization, the SE is really the person who understands the customer needs, is making that promise to the customer, is saying that, yes, if this is your problem, we know we can solve it. If this is the Excel sheet on which you run your process today, I can make sure that in the product you can do some of this. And I think when you're a founder, in some ways it is easier because you at least have the title, where within the organization people will stand up and pay attention to you. But I think as an SC, sometimes it can actually be much harder because product doesn't report into you. They have like a million competing responsibilities. Your AEs also don't report into you, and in many ways they probably think that they have the upper hand and they are the ones who are doing the real selling. So I think it's probably the space where I think SCs deserve a lot of respect. Have you in this process, Samir, come across maybe some tips that you can share from an SC perspective on how do you overcome the forces that are pulling all the other teams apart to actually get them to align towards the customer? Any frameworks, data points, anything that helps you in actually getting everybody on the same track?
Yeah, I mean, SEs play a unique role in that, and I think it's bound to happen to be that way anyway. I think, and so you better learn about ways to manage it. What I mean by that is, don't complain about the setup that you're fighting between many stakeholders to, get your solution set up and then sell it. I really think about ways you can actually help really unlock that, because very rarely there's like bad intentions or anything like that. It's like you said, really, there's different competing priorities in different departments. And as I think about how I would have handled this in the past, it comes down to, communication, building good relationships, and being customer focused as well. Because in the end, at the software company and any company, customer focus is critical. And if you kind of bring these together, you build good relationships, you make sure you have regular touch points with product, their roadmap, tell them what you're hearing, and making sure your voice is heard, and that compounds over time. And you're communicating regularly. You're not just, saying, get this, or this is not good, or this is a gap. This is why we lost this deal because we didn't have this feature. But really explain that this was what instigated the deal loss and what the customer was saying. Maybe even if you have a snippet from a call recording that you can share and say, hey, here's what they said. Here's what they maybe mean with that. And that helps, I think, a lot, rather than just, oh, we lost this deal because of a product gap, and then not be specific about it. And I think, yeah, that's sort of really critical, these things, in getting that to work. And I think it's important to accept, like, this is a role between many fronts, especially at the earlier stage of the company. The trickier that balance is, and that's fine. That's also part of why the role is so exciting, because you get to work with so many stakeholders.
Yeah, great points there. One, be specific with the feedback. Don't just try to, play a blame game. And I guess two, when there is success, you should also make sure that you give the credit to the right people and, recognize the efforts that went into them coming together, maybe at a short notice to solve a problem for the customer. And invest in those relationships for the long term. Great points there. Storytelling. And I know that this seems very obvious, especially from an entrepreneur's perspective. What I wanted to highlight here, and maybe Samir, I can go first on this one, right, is that as an entrepreneur, it is easy for people to see the story that they are often telling the world, from a customer standpoint, right? Like, to their potential customers, they're trying to tell what is the vision, what is the future state. But storytelling really, as an entrepreneur, cuts across many, many aspects, right? It is the story that you're trying to tell firstly to your co-founders. It is the story that you're trying to tell to your family, that you're going to, why you should quit your job and instead do something that is super risky. It is the story that you need to tell your investors, your employees, and of course, to your customers. But I think the other part of the storytelling really is, identifying the context in which you're framing that story, right? So in an entrepreneurship journey, very often you learn this when you are presenting to multiple investors within a short period of time, and then you realize that, if you're speaking to an investor who's invested in, say, sales tech space, which is, what is closest to me, then the story that you need to tell them is very different from an investor who invests in everything from edtech to B2C brands, who might not even understand what B2B selling looks like, right? And I think that's, in many ways, the same thing that you need to do, depending on who you are speaking to within an organization, which persona, what is the context of their problem. But Samir, you had, I think, some maybe juicy takes on the type of storytelling that one needs to do as an SC.
Yeah, I mean, storytelling I think it's fundamental. And yes, we would all agree, again, this all, on the surface of it, they seem obvious, storytelling. But in a way, as you think more deeply about this, it's not just how you do the demo flow and you talk about, hey, here's Sarah. Sarah's an engineer. She's now using this ticketing software, whatever. That's a nice little demo story. But what I mean by storytelling is also the bigger narrative. Like you said, Shruti, when you're raising money, you're talking to investors about how is this company going to be big and how we're going to transform people's lives. And I think as SEs, we also have to do that. Pretty much as sales teams as a whole, we have to think about what's the story, what's the narrative of how we are going to create change in the company and successfully do so and create better outcomes for people's jobs that they have. And that's what people buy into. And then what makes it easy then to transform as a company when you're doing this. I mean, think about it. So I was at the kind of Salesforce before Clary some years back. It's a big company. And all the big players in that space, Oracle, SAP, they all tick all the boxes for whatever they're selling, via the sales software, customer service software, marketing software. There's not a feature that distinguishes that Salesforce is better at this than SAP, just purely on a tick box level. But it's really you buy into the narrative that transformation, innovation will be easier, better, more successful by partnering with one specific company based on how they have framed the story, how they get people on board to believe in that, and how they then do the actual change as well downstream. And every company, how they pitch that and how they tell the story of that bigger change, that's really what makes them successful. And that's why companies like Salesforce have been successful for 25 years and are an admired brand by so many companies. And I think that's also how smaller companies, as the David versus Goliath, always are able to convince customers to partner with them because they believe again in the story of this transformation that they can help them achieve. And I think for SEs, it's a similar thing. And I think it's important that it goes beyond the demo flow. It's like, hey, here's a demo, rather than show features, then we'll tell a story of how it's going to be used at the tactical level. Really think about more broadly how this transformation is going to work. If somebody signs up for $100K, $1 million, whatever the amounts that you're selling is, that they want to make sure that they're part of a story as well, that it kind of is something that can be proudly telling friends what they've been doing, what they've achieved. So that's, I think, the storytelling it at the bigger level. I think it's quite obvious for sales engineers. Oh yeah, tell a story, don't just do a feature demo. And I think that's one piece of the bigger picture, and it's important to think bigger.
Yeah, I think an important part of the storytelling also, both from a startup perspective and from a product perspective as an SC is, what is the underlying philosophy or the manifesto of the company, right? So, an example from Wingman, when we started speaking to customers and we said that, hey, we can record sales conversations for your sales reps so that, the manager can go in and provide feedback. The sales reps can go back and listen to their own calls and, learn and improve from each other. The immediate feedback we got was that, oh, this is like, a big brother watching, right? It's like a watchdog. And nobody likes to get watched and observed, right? And so what we realized was that the story that we wanted to make sure came across was that this was a tool to empower sales reps so that they had an opportunity to get better, so that they could earn more money and, have a better life. And then when that becomes your underlying philosophy, I don't have to count out, these other 25 features on why we are, sales rep focused versus being watchdogs for the sales managers. When you define that, hey, this is the philosophy with which I'm building the product, people inherently assume that, the decisions that you make in the future are going to come from that framework. And so I think sometimes taking a bunch of features and, kind of filtering that down to what is the underlying philosophy or decision principle that you're using helps people understand. And, there are going to be people who then say that, oh, this is not the philosophy with which I agree, and therefore this is maybe not the right product for you. But you have to remember that every time you're finding somebody who believes that, this is exactly the path that they would have taken, there are probably also people that you're going to alienate, right? So when you're taking a position, you do land up alienating people, but it's important to codify that position. If you're somebody who has aspirations to be a founder in the future, it's important to maybe even sit down and write that almost as a manifesto, because then that helps you be consistent across your communication, and also for your team to understand what is the underlying principle with which you're building the product or thinking about the product building. So we have a question that maybe we'll take at the end of our presentation. But I think one thing that both Samir and I love very much is numbers. And of course, both from the roles that we've played, but I think also from the organizations and the products that we've worked very closely with, numbers have always been very, very close to that. Samir, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about what type of metrics do you think really matter to an SC? And how did you kind of go and track those metrics and make sure that you were on top of it or your team members were on top of it? And yeah, just curious to hear what that process
Yeah.
looked like.
It's so important to, data-driven decision making is so important in everyday lives of SEs, as ICs, but really, especially as managers, and I think as leaders in organizations, because numbers in the end don't lie. I mean, of course, you can always frame things in a way that might make something look better than it actually is, but in the end, numbers are numbers. And it's important to have a clear framework of what you're doing, get accurate pulse on it, and then be able to take decisions in a way that everybody understands why you're doing that. As an SE leader, as an SE, as a founder now as well, numbers are really the critical thing here. The biggest and the most important number, or the most important number for me, is always revenue. And then I think it's about sustainable revenue that you're generating with a company. I think there's a lot of ideas floating around. I'm maybe a bit extreme in that camp as an SE leader and now founder as well, but money talks. Money talks. That's really it. You don't get money, you don't win a deal, you don't win a customer, you don't bring money through the door as an SE. That's something that needs to be addressed, right? And everything else is downstream flowing for that. How sustainable is it? Did you just win it for 1 year and then churn again next year? All that stuff, of course. Don't be short-termed about it. But I've seen kind of people get distracted in SE land with, oh, how many activities, how many demos did you do, how many demo assets did you create, and equally in founder land where, oh, how many active users do we have, how many freemium do we have, it's so distracting. In the end, are they paying you actual dollars or euros or pounds, whatever you use in your country, for whatever service you're delivering? And I think that's always a good North Star to have. So I'm a big fan of keep things simple in sort of the framework, but the framework that you use then really rigorously inspect it. So revenue is one, and then there's leading indicators into that. What I really like, kind of as I think what leads to that, and what are we converting in the different stages of pipeline, and how is that progressing, and sort of these sort of metrics as they lead to revenue. I really like the innovations that have happened lately in the sort of pre-sales space, in the pre-sales category. I mean, demo automation with Consensus being one example, where you're able to track how are demos that we're sending out tracking, how are they being used, or are they helping us progress cycles in an effective way? Because no matter where I was before, we couldn't really do that. I would have great SEs on my team. They would be really creative as well and trying to progress a deal, maybe create a quick video, send it to a key stakeholder who wasn't quite on our side just yet, try to convert them, or have other ideas, and that's fantastic. But I was never able to really understand, does that move the needle or not? And I think now with innovation that's happened in this category, it's really possible to do that. And that's great. So we're adding much more science to the art of pre-sales, if you want. And I think that's a fantastic development.
Yeah, I think, and also the fact that we simply now can go back and, review the questions that were asked on a call, or review where in the pipeline deals are getting stuck, right? I think all of those things make it much, much easier to get visibility on the right type of things to improve. I think very often, it's easy to come up with a long list of things that you think should be happening to make things right. But it's like saying that, I need to strengthen every muscle in my body. But instead, what will actually get you the results is if you know exactly these are my 3 weak areas. And if I, improve these 3 muscles, I'm going to have much better health. Right. And I think that's the same thing that technology now enables us to do. In fact, I had a few fun numbers that I thought I could share just from, looking at what the sales world throws at us. So a few months back, I ran this poll on my LinkedIn, and I asked people, which of these things do you think helps improve deal win rates the most on sales calls? And then, of course, I looked at the data from Wingman to say, where these things happened in a sales call versus where they didn't. How did the win rates change? So, again, feel free to post your own answers. The answer that I got with the highest rating here, and by a far margin, was, taking a problem-based route. And I'm sure SCs broadly agree with it. But actually, all of these three things are super important, right? It's like if you have to build three muscles on improving your health, these three are probably useful ones to pick. But some data on what the improvement in the win rates is. And what is funny is that people don't even do simple things like setting agenda. And this was actually shocking for me that it was happening in less than 5% of the calls that we analyzed, where people are going in and saying, okay, you know what, these are the three things that we are going to try and do in the call, or, this is the agenda for today's conversation. But that actually can have the biggest impact and can be the biggest needle mover, because what you're doing there is that at the end of the call, you're leaving no ambiguity for someone to say what is the expectation, right? And that sets up the whole call in a manner that they're not just listening. It's not like a popcorn show with you doing all of the beautiful demo stories. But they are then committed to saying, okay, in my mind, I'm trying to answer this question at the end of this call, because that is what I've committed to as part of the agenda. And therefore, am I listening to every word with that particular filter in my head? So yeah, this was the spectacular winner, but here are the numbers for the other two. Problem-based selling, yes, definitely increases the win rate. 70%, maybe not as good as the simple agenda setting rules, but must do still. And adding customer stories to your demos and to your conversations, again, can have a big impact on win rates. Any comments, Samir?
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, all the people on the call now or in the webinar now, and those listening later to the recording, I mean, how many times have you seen a meeting put in by a salesperson without an agenda and had to ask them, what's the agenda if you have my SE joining your meeting? And yeah, now we have the science and the facts as well. It does actually help. It's not just nagging them to add an agenda to a sales meeting, but also it helps improve the win rate. So there's your data, everybody listening. You can use this the next time you chase people to add an agenda to a meeting.
I like that. I like that. Okay, balancing act. Samir, what are the things that you're trying to balance as an SC?
This is one of my favorite topics, balancing act. We all know it. And we talked about stakeholders already earlier. We talked about, all the things that SEs have to manage at one point in time. And I think one of the critical things is, and I'm again an extreme proponent of this, but I'm a sales engineer. So it's about sales more than it is about engineering. That's sort of how I look at it. And with sales, there's always a level of ambiguity in the future. We're not implementation consultants with a list of 50 requirements that need to be implemented and then go live successfully. We are kind of banking on a bit of ambiguity to achieve, hopefully, the outcome that we're promising. And we're trying to balance that with reality and then also kind of exciting people. And I think that's very interesting. That's very interesting to do, right? Because you kind of know how the product works and you know how hard it can be sometimes to deliver some of these things. And that's a tough balancing act for SEs. And it's the same thing as entrepreneurs. Right now, we're 2 months into our company. We have a good first product, we have first customers, but it's like there's always a level of ambiguity still in what we still need to do to make sure that we deliver fully on what we promise. And I think as an SE, you're also always in that balancing act. And I think it's a key skill in both camps. And I think it's good to just acknowledge that as well, that's a reality. And if I think back to some deals that I sold as an SE, I didn't always know if this is 100% possible to the nth degree what I was, let's say, showing in a demo. Certainly not if it was in a bigger company where there's like so many capabilities and so many uncertainties. Then if you did that, you will never end the sales cycle because you basically do a full implementation in the sales cycle already. And I think that's a balancing act where it is a key skill for SEs to manage. It's key for people who want to get into SE to understand, and also people who want to start their own company who might have a more rigid SE role where there's quite a lot of certainty, maybe a bit less ambiguity, to know that the ambiguity will only increase if they go to a startup as an SE or if they start their own company, I think. And that's important. It's exciting. There's suspense in that. But it is really kind of the role, and the sales part kind of hopes for some, can-do attitude and then banks on some of that kind of ability to execute as well as possible, but always kind of accounting for that you can't say today exactly what you will get in 6 months. that's a bit my perspective of the balancing act. Yeah, what do you think from an entrepreneur's perspective?
I like that. You're saying that you, as an SC, you're basically the person who has to make the promises but has no ability to control the outcomes of delivering on the product roadmap issues.
Yeah, it's a
No,
bit
but
that, exactly. It's a bit that.
yeah, I think this is probably a place where founders have it perhaps a little bit easier than SCs, I would say, and that's because you probably have more ability to influence the final outcomes of the promises that you make. But I think the balancing act that is really tough as a founder is the balancing act between showing the promised land and delivering on the promised land. Because very often, when you're actually trying to show the promised land, you're still just trying to decide what to build, and you're testing different types of hypotheses when you're speaking to customers and saying, you know what, yeah, this is what the product is going to be able to do. But you're actually going to decide whether or not to build it, depending on whether you think enough people need it and whether it's realistic and all of the other stuff. So I think that balancing act still very much holds, right, in terms of the dream and the reality. I think there is another part to that balancing act, which is you want the product to sound exciting, right? So an example when we were launching Wingman is that people wanted to hear the fact that, I have these, you know, grade A sales reps or A plus sales reps, and then I have these maybe B minus sales reps, and I want these B minus sales reps to do as well as my grade A sales reps, right? So how do I kind of make them better? Now, everybody wanted to hear that, and that was kind of a good pitch to go in and tell. But somewhere you also knew that the technology wasn't there, at least at that point in time, where you could really codify what made somebody a B minus rep or what made somebody a A plus rep. Right. So that's kind of the balancing act between saying that I can, that this is what people want to hear versus this is what the reality is. And very often, people will come and tell you that they want the moon. But what they really need is a way to, go from their home to the office more efficiently. Right. So it's important to, again, like I think going back to the early point on the voice of customer, I think the balancing act is also in terms of saying that, yes, this sounds sexy and exciting versus this is what is going to maybe move the needle for them in the next 6 months. And making sure that you help them focus on those right things versus wanting to, take something that is exciting, but maybe is not going to either deliver results, or maybe the organization is not ready for it. Maybe they don't have the data for it. Right. So being realistic and being candid about some of those can be tough.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
Okay, so I think this brings us to kind of the last quality that we feel is the balancing act. So, Samir, do you want to tell us why you see yourself as the person who needs to ignite the change?
Yeah, I think it's a team effort for sure. And I'm thinking about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship and SEs. Because as SEs, you do talk to so many stakeholders. And I think it's, again, important, you're selling something, you're selling people on a change, on a future that is better than the current world that they're experiencing. And I think you have to be looking at a glass half full. You have to be looking at a glass half full. You have to be kind of looking at this can be great. This can really help improve things. This can improve how the company operates, your daily lives. You don't have to work Sundays anymore looking through spreadsheets for your forecast. You can do that in Clary. You don't have to research companies manually. You can use, Sales Motion and these kinds of things. So you really have to sell them on that vision and ignite that change. And I think, yes, marketing is very high level. Then you go into sales. As you go down to pre-sales, we understand that there is going to be challenges. It's not going to be that easy to do this, and it's going to take some time. But it's that can-do attitude is critical. And I think with every demo, with every pitch, with every customer interaction, with every video you're creating, you have to keep that in mind. Like, we're trying to ignite change here. We're not trying to implement a solution or just do a feasibility exercise. We really try to ignite change, that this company transforms from where they are today to where they want to go in whatever you're selling, be it, you know, RevOps tooling, sales tooling, service tooling, marketing tooling, whatever the case is. And I think that's where that starts. And having that in mind, I think once you realize that, probably changes a bit how you talk to customers. I've seen that with, you know, junior sales engineers who kind of take the engineering part quite as a core of the role, and then don't think about, hey, this is about change as well, not just about being able to tick all the boxes for their requirements. It's about, hey, you're thinking about, you know, spending some money here, changing the way you work and 50 others in your company work, and why should you even bother with that? Because it kind of works the way it does today, and that's what you need to take into account, way beyond just the solution design. And I think everybody on the sales team is part of that, and the SCs especially, because they so deeply understand how the product can deliver that, and how their lives are going to improve. I think there's nobody better at that than the sales engineers who know, doing all the discovery on the current pains, looking through, wow, all these spreadsheets and this export and then import and then ETL. This does take so much time. And you know how the product works, and you know, well, this could be so much better. Of course, it's not maybe 1000% perfect, but it's so much better. And I think SEs, when they really put themselves in the shoes of the customer, they can, you know, really empathize, and they can probably get it over with such an enthusiasm that people buy into that massively, and be great igniters of change. That's sort of my perspective on that topic. Yeah, so far.
Yeah, I think very often, you know, whether as sellers of technology or as builders of technology or entrepreneurs, we underestimate the pain that change brings with it, right? And therefore, you know, how much of a leap of faith somebody is taking when they are agreeing to, you know, go ahead with your solution and implement a change, right? And that's kind of a big part of the role of a sales engineer, right? And I think in the early days for a founder, to not just recognize what is, you know, what are all the aspects of that change management, but make sure that you're creating enough critical energy to help people jump over that hurdle, right? And I think that's kind of where making the right type of promises comes in. But especially as a founder, one big lever that you have is, you know, in some cases, hand holding them through the change process, by maybe even getting people in your team to do things manually for them, right? So early on when we started, you know, Wingman, one of the big things that people as sales managers were interested in is, you know, some sort of aggregate analysis on, you know, what are the top 5 questions that customers ask, what are some of the top reasons why we lose deals, you know, for the competitors that show up, right? Like, what are the things that people are really saying about these 3 competitors of ours? And while, you know, the product couldn't deliver all of those in an automated fashion, and honestly, the technology overall wasn't even in place to be able to do that type of analysis, we could get someone to do that and deliver that report to them. And over a period of time, you know, they get more comfortable with the tool, they can set up their alerts, they can do a bunch of things that help them get to the same outcomes. But early on, if you just leave it all in their hands to manage through the change and to get to the results that they need, that's, you know, that's, you're setting them and yourself up for failure. So I think it's important to understand where, you know, how do you need to create the excitement to overcome the hurdle that change presents. And if to create that excitement, you need to do something that is not scalable, do something that is one-off, you absolutely have to be okay to do that. Awesome. So we thought we will, you know, share our coordinates. So feel free to reach out to us. We do have a couple of questions here. So Sammy, if you're around, do you want to ask us the questions?
Yeah, definitely. So we have one from Mark. I've seen people in pre-sales want to push forward with entrepreneurial spirit and pushing innovative ideas, but inside large, slow-moving organizations. What tips do you have for them if they want to stay within that company?
Yeah, the question just disappeared. I was just reading it again. Let me just see.
I think it's in the answered
Yes.
section.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, if it's a big so I was just talking about this with my co-founder this morning. I mean, I was at Accenture first, then at Salesforce. Accenture was a 120,000 people company. I was a consultant. Then at Salesforce was 25,000 people, and then at Clarity, which was 500 or so at some point. I think it always depends on which pocket in these various organizations you're in. Accenture, I had an amazing time, very innovative, very fast-moving part of the company. And I've seen people transition into that part. And when they told us what they were doing before, they said, oh, this doesn't sound exciting at all. So they changed within an organization to a different team to work on a different project. And even the same thing happened at Salesforce, where some teams are more fast-moving, innovative, experimenting, and some maybe less so. And that's fine. Right? Both have their place of existence, which is totally okay. But I think it's trying to find ways of how to move within an organization if it's large enough. And I think there's almost always some pockets are more innovative than others. It's probably is finding those. Probably it's a bit of an uphill battle if you want to change the organization completely, especially if it's a large organization. So that would be my advice. Think about where do you want to go and how do you get into that pocket that's a bit more interesting. That's probably the easiest way. If you're an IC somewhere, you kind of think, hey, I want to do something more innovative, or even a leader, to be honest. That's how I would approach that, to do that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, and this is also equally applicable in a sales setting, which is you find the people who might have an incentive for bringing about the change, right? So even if, like, sometimes it might be a junior person who is more interested in, say, technology, or who's more interested in being experimental, versus maybe a senior person who feels that they've already kind of gone up the ladder. There isn't that much for them to gain by bringing on more work to themselves as people perceive it. So sometimes it might be the pockets might come not just in terms of departments, but might come in terms of people's personal interests in their own career growth, in their own need and want to improve their skills. So sometimes finding those allies can be useful. I know that in larger organizations, it can be hard for junior people to sometimes influence bigger outcomes. But having good relationships with your peer group and being able to influence them, and then maybe using that as a way to build momentum around a particular idea is something that's also worth trying.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you guys have any more questions, you can feel free to connect with Samir and Shruti on LinkedIn. I'm going to post the links in the chat just so you guys have easy access. I'm not sure if those QR codes were working. And thank you both, Shruti and Samir. Thank you guys so much for lending us your time and your expertise. Thank you to everybody who asked questions and joined us today. And we will send you guys first access to the recording as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.